Thank you so much for having me here today. It's an incredible honor and pleasure. I wanted to thank tGELF, the leadership of tGELF, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about me personally and then also about what I do professionally, and I'll speak a little bit to the Syrian refugee crisis. And the reason that I'm taking you on a personal journey is because my conversations with the great Gowri Ishwaran suggest that this may be something that the scholars might find interesting. So you'll bear with me through a little bit of personal and a little bit of professional. What I do is I study sort of the primitives for education. We've talked a lot about education tonight, but actually education depends on human brain development, and it depends on exactly how well that development proceeds. And so what I do on a daily basis is I study those influences on human brain development, be they genetic, be they environmental, be they some interaction between the two. And at what point in development are we seeing changes in very basic skills that are important for conflict resolution, for educational achievement, for interaction with others? And so what are these skills? What am I talking about? What is developing in the human brain? Well, human brain development supports basic skills like what we call theory of mind or empathy. Theory of mind is the ability to take someone else's perspective, the ability to think through what they're thinking so that you may interact with them at their level. This is something that we don't see in children until about 5 years old. We study cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to switch between one set of ideas, demands, rules, conversations, and another. Bilingualism is an example of cognitive flexibility, being able to talk to one person in one language and then switch and talk to someone else in another language. And this is a very complex skill, and this is something that actually involves the part of the brain that doesn't develop well into adolescence. Learning and memory is something that we can study as early as 2 months. The human brain is equipped to gather information as early as babies can start to hear, as early as they can start to look around. Control over behavior, not giving into our impulses, not giving into our emotions. This morning, for those of you who are lucky to be here, we heard a lot about reasoning rather than responding based on reason rather than responding based on emotion. And that's something that requires a tremendous amount of control over our emotions and a tremendous amount of control over our behavior and our impulses. And for any of you who have ever been around a 2 or 3-year-old, they don't have a lot of that. That's something that's changing within them. That's why we call them the terrible twos, the tantrums. They're not prepared yet for education. And communication and language, the obvious place where you see tremendous amounts of change well into late childhood. And reasoning, the ability to take a variety of different ideas and to organize and reorganize them, not just through language, but in your mind over and over again. So there's tremendous amounts of brain development that are taking place, and we know a lot about this. We know when these things develop, we know what parts of the brain are involved, we know how they're shaped. And it turns out, in my conversations with some at tGELF, it became very obvious that these things that are developing are also the things that are incredibly important for excellent leadership. So we talked a little bit when I first met the wonderful folks at tGELF about, well, what exactly is a leader? Well, a leader is someone who has the ability to control their behavior, to reason, to speak and communicate effectively, right? To think flexibly, to understand what someone else is thinking. And so in very many ways, the basic principles of human brain development are what's making an excellent leader and an excellent global citizen. So the problem that I confront is, how does this development work? Because in a perfect world, we would all have these skills and they would all be honed beautifully, and we would all be able to take an incredible advantage of the educational opportunities we have in our country and here in the United States, and whenever wonderful work provides education elsewhere. But the truth is, education can only work on a healthy developing brain. And so development doesn't proceed in this wonderful, from point A to point B is a simple superhighway. In fact, development is a really beautiful, messy dance. It's a cascade of events. So it's more like this waterfall than like that superhighway. So rather than water flowing smoothly from one place to another, from birth to adulthood, it encounters a natural landscape on this journey. And any single rock can change the water in this landscape. And when you talk about things like difficult circumstances, stressful experiences, illnesses, etc., all of these are small rocks on the landscape. All of these are stressors that are changing exactly how the development of each individual is happening. Each of us has our small rocks, and each of us, in some cases, has bigger rocks that are sort of sending our systems differently. And that's how we're different. That's how we're all different as adults. We have our individual differences that we encounter. So that in being change, development is a time of immense opportunity, but it's also a time of immense risk. Anytime you have a system that is in flux, it's also a system that is at risk. And when confronted with typical environments, children do mostly really well. The environment need not be perfect. You have one-on-one caregiving, the opportunity for exploration, the opportunity for play, learning, stimulation, friendship, empathy, and even a little stress is really good for the developing brain. But what about if that environment is not typical, right? What happens to my cascade when it gets a huge boulder in it? What if you're in a refugee camp in Syria or you're orphaned in Rwanda? Now you've experienced poverty, war, noise, suffering. You've lost one or both parents. You no longer have a home that you can call your own. You don't have the things that were comforting to you in your home circumstances. And here you are in this immense developmental period where your brain is being shaped to receive information and to actually evolve into something that can function in a society that demands a tremendous amount from every one of us. So this isn't a rock in my cascade. This is a glacier, what's happening in these refugee camps and what's happening all over the world for children. And this, from a scientific level, is incredibly interesting to me. Right? I study the influences on human brain development, and there is nothing bigger that's going to happen than what's happening in these circumstances. On a personal level, it's even bigger. I'm a Syrian woman. Had my parents decided not to come to the States, that's my child up there. I have a beautiful 7-year-old boy named George who's absolutely receiving the best possible education in the world right now, who is growing and flourishing in his environment. It would have taken a small twist of fate for him to be living in one of those camps up there. That's very personal. And it's very frustrating to be in a circumstance where you're watching people living in this way by no choice of their own. So what does this have anything to do with leadership? Well, I thought, what is somebody like me going to do in a circumstance like this? So I'm a scientist, I study brain development, and I feel an incredible call to service to what's happening in these camp situations, in any situations where children are struggling and suffering with terrible circumstances. You know, what is it that I can contribute to this? And obviously, I'm not a politician and I can't stop it, but I'd like to do something to alter this developmental trajectory. So in this challenging moment, it occurred to me that maybe my talent can be useful, right, to altering this developmental trajectory. And so what we've done as a collective community of scientists is to develop a mission where we take these terrible circumstances and say, well, we can't change these circumstances, but what we can do is we can use our science to fortify healthy human brain development in these terrible circumstances. So what we've tried to do now is we were starting to work as a global scientific community to develop something called the Basic Principles of Healthy Brain Development Curriculum. And the idea is that when children are growing up in the midst of violence and wartime, what we need to do is we need to take a very reductionist approach, which is hone in on exactly what species-typical brain development absolutely requires to prevent pathology, right? How am I going to prevent aggressive behavior later? How am I going to prevent depression? How am I going to prevent anxiety? And we know a tremendous amount in the scientific community about how to do this. We use animal models, we use human models, and none of that has been brought to bear on what's happening in extreme circumstances of toxic stress in children. And so we're devising these recommendations based on evidence-based science. We're working with NGOs to bring this curriculum to the ground, and we hope that in implementing this on a wide scale in cultural in cultural appropriate ways, that what we can do is we can actually provide some protection for the health of the basic cognitive and brain operations that are developing in children. And the idea is that these are recommendations that are meant to be implementable in a community-based, feasible way, without need for policy, infrastructure, or tremendous amount of support from the medical community. And we truly feel that this is, in this way, we can actually make a difference with what's happening with these children. So what might you want to keep, what am I talking about? What are principles of healthy brain development, and how might you as scholars, leaders, students implement some of these for yourselves? This actually revolves around the science of stress reduction. If I can reduce your stress on a daily basis, I can protect your healthy brain development. Stress reduction proceeds through very simple things. 1 hour of cardiovascular exercise a day will physically change your cortisol response. Your stress will actually change. Regularity, and not necessarily duration of sleep, impacts learning and memory. If you sleep regularly, and especially regularly after certain lessons or classes, you will consolidate information better. It will not leave you. Mindfulness and meditation have been over and over again proven to improve attention and control over behavior. These practices are incredibly important for maintaining healthy brain development. And there is no single way to learn, by carrot or by stick. It depends on the learner. Look inside yourself for what it is that makes your learning possible and makes your contributions possible, and make that how you go about your daily life. So yes, development is change, but it's also hope. And for me, I don't think there will be a lost generation. I think we still have time to work with these kids and prevent a lot of what is going to hopefully never become a terrible pathology or a terrible tragedy. So for me, out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls, the most massive characters are seared with scars. So I truly believe that there is still plenty of time for us to make a big difference by taking evidence-based science and bringing it to the ground and working with kids in any kind of global crisis. And with that, I'll leave you.
tGELF, leading the change.